They warned me about the Count of Ashborne. They said he was cursed, that every woman who danced with him lost something she could never get back. I laughed at the superstition. That was before the masquerade, before he looked at me like I was the source of all his rage, like I was the answer to a question he had never dared to ask, before I realized that hating him was the only thing keeping me safe, and that by dawn, I was no longer safe at all. If this story already has you, subscribe and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. The carriage wheels struck the cobblestones of Hawthorne County at 9:30, and Vivian Ashford pressed her gloved fingers to the cold fogged glass and told herself she was not afraid. She had rehearsed this. Every word, every step, every careful, measured smile she would deploy like a weapon in the gilded halls of Wintercrest Hall tonight. She was not here to dance. She was not here to find a husband. God forbid, not that, not now. Not while her father's name was still whispered in London parlours, with that tone people reserved for men ruined beyond recovery. Not while the ledgers at Ashford House showed numbers that made her chest ache every time she opened them. Not while the answer to everything, every debt, every sleepless night, every carefully folded letter she had found in her father's study, pointed to one name: Ashbourne. She said it quietly, just once, to the dark interior of the carriage. The word tasted like cold iron. The Count of Ashborne, Lord Crestian Vale, to those who still bothered with formality. A man she had never met. A man who, according to every source she had quietly, desperately consulted over the past 3 months, had not attended a single social event in over 2 years. A man rumoured, by the servants, by the dressmakers, by the women who gathered in drawing rooms and pretended not to enjoy gossip, to be cursed. Vivienne did not believe in curses. She believed in debts. She believed in documents. She believed in the kind of truth that left paper trails. And tonight, while half of England's aristocracy drank champagne and waltzed behind silk masks at the season's most exclusive masquerade, she intended to find her paper trail. The carriage stopped. She straightened her spine before the footman could open the door, adjusted the white and gold mask she had borrowed because purchasing a new one was a luxury she no longer permitted herself, smoothed the cream silk of her gown, which had been her mother's once, altered carefully, the beading at the waist refashioned to look deliberate rather than dated. She looked, she knew, exactly like what she was pretending to be, a young woman of modest means, unremarkable, unthreatening. She looked like no one worth watching. That was the point. Wintercrest Hall was everything the rumours promised. The great entrance hall soared above her, candlelight falling from chandeliers so heavy with crystal they seemed to breathe, throwing fractured light across the walls and the faces of 200 guests who moved through the space like something out of a dream. The music was already threading through the rooms, a string quartet playing something achingly beautiful that Vivienne recognized and refused to feel anything about. She was here to work. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and did not drink it. She moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years learning to be invisible when necessary. Head slightly inclined, eyes forward, the faintest curve of a smile that said, "I belong here," without saying anything at all. The Ashbourne correspondence, according to the solicitor's notes she had memorized, was stored in the East Wing study. Lord Hartwell, the estate's current host, was known to keep his most important documents in the second drawer of the mahogany desk by the far window. She needed 20 minutes, possibly less. She was nearly to the corridor that led east when the music changed. It shifted, not dramatically, not the kind of change that made people turn their heads. Just a subtle lowering of the room's temperature, or so it seemed to her, the way the air sometimes changed before a storm that hadn't announced itself yet. She paused without knowing why, and then she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She had grown up with a father who watched rooms for a living, who had taught her, before everything fell apart, that you could always feel a gaze that meant something, that most stares slid off your skin like water. But some caught. This one caught. She turned slowly, as if simply glancing toward the dancing, as if she had no direction in mind. He was standing at the far edge of the ballroom, apart from the nearest cluster of guests by exactly the width of an unspoken warning. He was tall, not merely tall, but the kind of tall that altered the architecture of a room, that made the ceiling seem lower and the space between them seem both very large and impossibly small at once. He wore black. All black, in a room of jewel tones and pastels. Coat, waistcoat, gloves, with a single exception, the mask. The mask was gold. Polished, ornate, covering the upper half of his face in a sweep of gilded metal that caught the candlelight and threw it back. Below the mask, a jaw set hard as carved marble. A mouth that was neither a line nor a curve, something in between. Something that belonged to a man who had stopped performing pleasantness some time ago and had never troubled himself to start again. He was looking at her. Not the way men looked at women at balls, the cataloguing glance, the assessing sweep, the variety of male attention that felt like being appraised at an auction. This was different. This was the look of someone who had been waiting. Not for her specifically. She was quite sure he had never seen her before in his life, but for something, someone. The kind of wait that had gone on long enough to turn into something other than patience. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. She was not a woman who looked away first. Not anymore. Then she turned deliberately and continued toward the corridor. She had taken 4 steps when she heard the footstep behind her. Not hurried, not hesitant. Purposeful. The sound of someone who moved through spaces as if they had already decided how they would end. "You're going the wrong direction." His voice was low, not unkind, but not kind either. It was the voice of a man who had no interest in softening things unnecessarily. It landed beside her left ear, which meant he was closer than she had calculated, which meant she had not heard him cross the room at all, and that, she noted with the back of her mind, was alarming. She stopped, drew one breath to arrange the expression she wanted, then she turned. Up close he was worse or better. She was not yet prepared to make that distinction. The gold mask caught the light differently at this distance. She could see the fine detail of it now, the small engraved pattern along the upper edge, thorns worked into vines. His eyes, visible through the mask's openings, were a shade of blue that she had no adequate word for. Not sky, not sea. Something older and colder than either, the blue of deep water before it decided whether to be calm or cruel. "I beg your pardon?" she said. Her voice was exactly right. Cool, faintly puzzled, the tone of a woman mildly confused by an interruption and would prefer it ended quickly. "The East Wing," he said. "It's locked, has been since Thursday." The information landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. She let nothing show. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean," she said. "I was simply looking for the retiring room." "The retiring room," he said, "is to your left." A pause. He was watching her with the focused attention of someone who had learned to see through this kind of performance and found it neither impressive nor offensive, merely transparent. "Thank you," she said and began to turn. "Miss Ashford." She stopped. The sound of her name, her real name, not the distant connection fiction, not the carefully vague social introduction she had arranged. In this man's mouth, in this corridor, at this moment, produced in her chest a sensation she identified immediately as danger. She turned back slowly. "I'm sorry," she said with calibrated confusion. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No," he agreed. "We haven't." He reached up and removed the gold mask. She had thought somehow that the mask was doing significant work, that removing it would reduce him in some way, reveal the ordinary man behind the mythology. She had been wrong. Without the mask, Lord Crestian Vale, the Count of Ashborne, was simply himself. The hard jaw and those blue eyes and a face that told the story of a man who had spent time in a darkness and had not entirely returned from it. There were shadows under his eyes that had nothing to do with the hour. A small scar at the left temple, fine as a thread. He was looking at her as if he had been expecting her to appear in his life and was not especially pleased about it. "I know who you are," he said. "I know why you're here, and I know what you think you'll find in that study." The champagne glass was still in her hand. She became aware of her fingers tightening around it. "Then you're at an advantage," she said. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." The music swelled in the ballroom behind them, a waltz beginning its slow circling climb. Someone laughed, a bright, uncomplicated laugh that belonged to a world neither of them seemed to currently occupy. "What do you want?" she asked. Because this was the question, always. Everyone at a ball like this wanted something. The only variable was the currency. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for words, the quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth to release. "A dance," he said finally. She stared at him. "You know who I am," she said slowly. "You know I came here under a false introduction. You know what I'm looking for. And your opening offer is a dance." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the shadow of what a smile might look like on a face that had largely forgotten the motion. "Consider it a conversation in a room where conversations are observed," he said. "Consider it a minute on the floor where I explain to you why you are in more danger than you realize. Consider it—" The shadow faded. "The only version of this evening that ends without you being escorted out by Lord Hartwell's men." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the locked east wing. She thought about her father's letters. She thought about the number at the bottom of the last page of the Ashford House ledger. She held out her hand. "One dance," she said. He looked at her hand for one beat, something flickering in those blue eyes that she could not read, something that was there and then wasn't one before he took it. His grip was careful, deliberate, the kind of touch that communicated a great deal of practice in touching nothing at all. She filed that away and followed him onto the floor. The waltz was in 3/4 time, and Lord Crestian Vale danced the way he apparently did everything else, with the controlled, unhurried gravity of a man who had long since stopped performing for audiences. His hand at her waist was correct in its position. His steps were perfectly timed. There was nothing about him that could in any observable way be described as too close. And yet Vivian was acutely, uncomfortably aware of the distance between them, as though it were a physical thing, a charged and narrow margin, 4 inches of air between her chest and his, that seemed to possess its own weather. She kept her chin level, her expression mildly interested, pleasantly engaged, every bit the unremarkable young woman who had wandered into a conversation with an intriguing stranger at a ball. "You should know," she said quietly, "that I have no idea what you're talking about, regarding the danger. You should know," he returned, equally quiet, "that there are 2 men in this room who work for the same person you believe ruined your father, and they've been watching you since you arrived." She did not look up, did not scan the room. That was the first instinct, and always the wrong one. "How do you know about my father?" she asked. "Because the same person who ruined him," he said, "spent 3 years trying to ruin me first." The waltz turned them, the room spinning gently in her peripheral vision, candlelight and masks, and the flash of jewels against dark coats. And she processed this information with the careful, methodical focus of someone diffusing something delicate. "You're saying you're not responsible," she said. "I'm saying," he replied, "that the documents you came here to find do not incriminate me." "They incriminate Lord Hartwell." She nearly missed a step, nearly. She recovered so smoothly that she was almost sure he hadn't noticed. From the way his jaw shifted fractionally, she knew he had noticed. "That's a convenient claim," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "it would be, if it weren't true. Why should I believe you?" He was quiet for 3 full measures of the waltz. She counted them. Beneath her gloved hand on his shoulder, she could feel the faint tension there. Not anger, she thought. Something more layered. Something closer to the strain of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "You shouldn't," he said finally. "Not yet. But consider this. If I had wanted to protect whatever role you believe I played in your father's ruin, I would not have crossed this room to stop you. I would have let Lord Hartwell's men find you at that study door. The outcome would have been neat, swift, and entirely deniable." She considered this. She did not want to consider it, because it had the texture of logic she couldn't immediately dismantle. "What do you want?" she asked again, because she had not forgotten that she had already asked this question once and received a waltz as an answer, and she did not intend to be redirected twice. This time he looked at her. Not the glancing, guarded attention of a man being socially careful, directly at her, the way very few people looked at other people in rooms like this one. It lasted long enough to feel like something other than an answer. "I want the same thing you do," he said. "Evidence. The kind that holds in front of a magistrate. The kind that ends the right man. And you need me for that. You have access to your father's private letters. I have access to financial records that on their own mean nothing, but beside those letters tell a complete story." The waltz was ending. She could feel it in the music's arc, the way the melody curved toward its conclusion. In moments they would separate, and the night would fork into whatever came next. She made herself look at him directly. Really look, past the controlled expression, past the blue eyes and the careful distance, into the quality of a man who was, she thought, genuinely not performing for her, which was, she was finding, surprisingly difficult to manage. "If you're lying to me," she said quietly as the final notes fell, "I will make sure everyone with any power to harm you knows exactly where to look." Something moved across his face. Not fear, not offense. Something she could only describe, inadequately, as recognition. The look of a person encountering unexpectedly something familiar. "If I'm lying to you," he said, with that shadow of a not-quite smile, "you'll have my full cooperation." The music stopped. He stepped back, releasing her hand with the same careful deliberateness with which he had taken it. Around them the room exhaled and redistributed, couples parting, new conversations beginning, the ball resuming its golden machinery. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 10 o'clock. The old Ashbourne gatehouse, half a mile past the North Crossroads. Come alone." He replaced the gold mask. And then, with the unhurried certainty of a man who had already decided how this evening would end, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Vivienne stood at the edge of the dance floor for 4 long seconds, champagne glass still in her hand, untouched and warm now, and allowed herself exactly this much, a single, quiet, controlled breath. Then she turned and found the retiring room she had claimed to be looking for, and did not, for the remainder of the night, let herself think about blue eyes. She almost didn't go. She told herself this the following morning as she dressed. Practical grey wool sensible boots, the small folding penknife in her coat pocket that her father had given her when she was 16 and that she had never once needed and always carried. And she told herself it again in the carriage and once more at the North Crossroads, where the driver pulled the horses to a stop, and she sat for a long, still moment looking out at the frost-whitened lane. Almost. The gatehouse was stone, old, half-covered in ivy, gone brown and skeletal in the February cold. One window caught the thin morning light and held it. The gate itself stood open, not swung wide, not welcoming, but open in the way of something that had simply stopped being closed. She got out of the carriage. She told her driver to wait. The door to the gatehouse was unlocked. Inside, a fireplace with a low fire already burning, which told her he had been here before her. A table, 2 chairs. A leather case closed, sitting on the table beside a stack of papers, she recognized immediately as financial in nature. The layout of accounting ledgers, columns and figures, the language of money carefully tracked. And the Count of Ashborne, standing by the window, looking out at the lane she had just walked up with his back to her. He was not wearing the gold mask. There was no occasion for masks here. In daylight, in a cold stone room with a modest fire, he looked. She searched for the word and arrived at it reluctantly. Diminished was wrong. Exposed was closer. Not vulnerable, not exactly. More as though the formal armor of the previous evening had been set aside, and what remained was simply a man. The same hard jaw, the same careful stillness, but something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of weight rather than power. He turned when he heard her. "You came," he said. He sounded not surprised, something subtler, something that might, on a different face, have been relief. "You have my father's documents," she said, instead of anything else. "On that table." He looked at the table and back at her. "Copies," he said. "The originals are in a location I'm not prepared to disclose yet, for reasons that will become clear." She crossed the room, pulled out a chair, and sat without waiting for an invitation, a small act of agency that she needed in this moment. She looked at the papers. What she saw in the first 30 seconds of reading made her jaw tighten. Lord Hartwell, his name, his signature, his seal, across a sequence of transactions that told a clear story. Assets transferred, investments redirected, the slow and methodical engineering of a ruin made to look like mismanagement. Her father had not been careless. He had been targeted. She was aware that her hand, resting on the table, had closed into something close to a fist. "He came for me first," Christian said. He had not moved from the window. There was something in his voice, flat, factual, the tone of a man recounting something he has long since finished grieving and is now simply reporting. 4 years ago. I had evidence of his land fraud in the North Counties, acquired by accident as these things often are. He knew I had it. He began the process of discrediting me. A pause. Among other things. The curse, she said. She said it without inflection. She was not conceding belief, merely acknowledging the word's existence in their conversation. He was quiet for a moment. "Come with me," he said. He led her to the back room of the gatehouse, smaller, with a lower ceiling and a second window that looked out over what must have been, in another era, a kitchen garden now gone to frost and tangle. On the wall, pinned with the systematic care of someone who had been doing this for a long time, was a record. Dates, times, written in a small, precise hand that she recognized after a moment as his own. A calendar stretching back, she counted quickly, 2 years, perhaps more. And beside each date, brief notations. Woke. No memory of Tuesday. Woke. Recalled conversation with Hartwell's solicitor. Confirms meeting, cannot recall content. Woke. 6 hours gone. R present. R says I spoke. I have no record of it. She read in silence for a long time. The fire in the other room crackled. Outside, a bird crossed the cold sky. "Every morning," she said quietly. "Not every morning," he said. "It's not consistent. Some days are complete, others—" He stopped, started again. "The first time it happened, I thought I was ill. By the 5th time, I had begun to suspect something else." His voice was completely even. That somehow was the most difficult part to hear, the absence of self-pity in it, the way he described his own disintegration with the tone of a man reporting weather. "And you believe Hartwell is responsible," she said. "I believe," he said carefully, "that the same night Hartwell and I had our last meeting, the meeting during which I told him I intended to go to the magistrate, was the night this began." She turned from the wall and looked at him. In the cold morning light, without the ballroom's gilding, she could see the shadows under his eyes more clearly. The scar at the left temple. The way he stood, not with the performative ease of aristocracy, but with the practiced, tired uprightness of someone who had decided that collapsing was not an option and had been carrying that decision for a long time. She did not want to feel anything about this. She had come here for documents and evidence, and a clear path toward her father's restoration. She had not come here to feel anything about a cursed count standing in a cold room, watching her read the careful record of everything he had lost. "You recognize me," she said. It was not quite a question. She was thinking of what he had said on the dance floor. She was thinking of the look on his face when she had turned to him the previous night and held his gaze, and the something that had flickered in those blue eyes before he crossed the room. He was quiet for a moment that stretched in a weighted way. "Yes," he said, "we've never met." "No." "Then how—" "I don't know," he said. And the simplicity of it, the honesty of "I don't know" from a man who struck her as constitutionally disinclined toward admitting ignorance, landed in the room differently than she expected. "That is the one part I cannot explain. Every morning that I lose, there is one thing that remains." He paused. A face, not a name, not a conversation, just a face. He did not say whose. He didn't need to. The room was very quiet. The fire murmured in the next room. Outside, the frost sat on the old garden like something waiting patiently to be told what to do next. Vivian thought about the ledgers at Ashford House, about her father who had not looked at her directly in 6 months because shame did that to a man, bent his gaze toward the floor and kept it there, about the number at the bottom of the last page. She thought about the record on the wall pinned with careful hands. "I need to see the original documents," she said. "I know. And I need you to tell me everything, every meeting, every transaction, every conversation you can remember. We document it. All of it." "Yes." "And in return," she said, "you'll have access to my father's letters, the ones that name Hartwell directly." She looked at him steadily. "We work together." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she could not entirely read, not gratitude, not relief, though perhaps both were present somewhere beneath the surface. Something more layered than either. Something that looked like the expression of a person who has been holding a very heavy thing alone for a long time and has just been offered unexpectedly another pair of hands. "Agreed," he said. She stood, picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "I'll return Thursday," she said. "Bring everything you have." She was at the door when he said quietly, "Miss Ashford." She stopped, did not turn all the way. Just enough. "Be careful going home," he said. "Hartwell's men were at the ball last night. They'll know by now that we spoke." She thought about the penknife in her coat pocket, about the carriage waiting at the crossroads, about the quality of a warning delivered not as control, but as something more careful than that. "I'm always careful," she said. She stepped out into the cold February morning. Behind her in the gatehouse the fire continued to burn. By Thursday 3 things had changed. Her father's solicitor had confirmed, with the expression of a man delivering news he wishes he didn't have, that Hartwell had filed a second petition against the Ashford estate. This one seeking to acquire the last significant piece of unencumbered property, the small house in Devonshire that had been her mother's, left to Vivian in the will, set specifically outside the estate's general holdings. He was not finished with them. The second thing, one of her father's old correspondents, a retired colonel who had known the family since before Vivian was born, had sent a brief letter in which he mentioned, almost in passing, that he had been visited recently by a representative of Lord Hartwell asking questions about the Ashford family's social connections. "Fishing," the colonel had written. "I gave him nothing, but thought you should know they were being mapped. Their contacts, their allies, their remaining credibility, catalogued and assessed." The third thing was smaller and larger at once, the way the smallest things sometimes were. She had dreamed about the gatehouse, not about the documents or the evidence or the careful record on the wall, about the window light and the way it had fallen across a man's hands as he explained his own undoing with a voice that refused to ask for anything. She arrived at the gatehouse at 5 minutes to 10. He was already there, the fire already lit, the table already cleared, a new set of papers laid out with the same systematic order she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. As she came through the door, he looked up from the window. Something passed across his face. A small, swift thing, gone almost before she could name it. She thought, relief. She did not say so. "You're early," he said instead. "So are you," she said, unbuttoning her coat. "I have news, none of it good." She told him about the solicitor, about the colonel's letter. She watched his expression as she spoke, the controlled attention of a man processing information, the faint tightening around his eyes as the pattern became clear. "He's accelerating," Christian said when she finished. "Yes, which means he knows—" He stopped. His jaw shifted. "He knows about the masquerade. He knows we spoke. His men were watching," she said. "You told me so yourself." He moved from the window to the table, bracing both hands against its surface, looking at the papers. The posture was not defeat, it was calculation, the look of a man reordering a problem. "We need to move faster than I planned," he said. "Tell me what we have." What they had spread across the table over the next 2 hours was substantial and incomplete in equal measure. Christian's financial records showed a clear pattern of diversion. Funds moved through intermediary accounts, investments redirected in ways that technically looked like market losses, but bore, when traced carefully, the fingerprints of deliberate engineering. "This is the skeleton," he said, "proof of the mechanism. But we need the motive, the documented relationship between Hartwell and the initial investments. That was what her father's letters would provide, the why to accompany the how." She produced them from the inner pocket of her coat, folded, worn at the creases, 5 letters in her father's hand that she had memorized in the process of carrying them for 3 months. She watched his face as he read them. He read carefully. He read twice. He did not comment until he had finished the last one, and when he set it down he looked at it for a moment, with an expression she had not yet seen from him, something quiet and grim in the way of someone whose worst theory has just been confirmed. "He told your father," Christian said, "that I was the one who initiated the fraud." "Yes." "And your father believed it. He had documentation, forged clearly, but convincingly done." She paused. "He wasn't careless. He was deceived by someone he trusted." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the February wind moved through the skeletal ivy. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it without decoration. Not "I'm sorry you misunderstood" or "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," just the plain shape of it. She nodded once, tightly, not quite trusting herself to respond to that register of honesty. "Between your records and these letters," she said, "do we have enough?" "Almost." He pulled a page from the financial documents, a transfer record, a date she recognized from one of the letters. This transaction, the date matches your father's letter, the amount matches. If we can trace the account, it came from back to Hartwell, and I believe we can through his solicitor's records. He stopped. I need access to his private accounts, the ones held at Coutts. And how do you propose to get that? He was quiet for a moment. Hartwell will be in London next week. Parliamentary session. His voice was measured. His estate will be minimally staffed. There is a window, not large, in which a careful person with the right introduction might access his private study. She looked at him. You're asking me to go to Hartwell's estate. I'm telling you it's possible, he said. I am not... Something in his jaw. I am not asking you to do anything. I want to be clear about that. You came here for your family. You have already taken risks I did not ask you to take. Whatever we decide to do next is decided together, or not at all. She regarded him for a long moment. She had been prepared, coming here, for several varieties of man. She had been prepared for a villain who was subtler than expected. She had been prepared for a desperate man using her situation to serve his own ends. She had been prepared in her more honest moments for an innocent man who was nonetheless difficult, self-interested, unwilling to acknowledge complexity. She had not been prepared for this, for a man who laid his worst moments on a wall in careful handwriting and offered them as evidence. Who said I don't know when he didn't know? Who said together or not at all and meant it? Tell me about the estate, she said. He looked at her. That look again. The one from the Masquerade, from the gatehouse window, from the moment she had produced her father's letters. The one she was beginning to learn as specific to him. The look of a man encountering something he had not expected and was trying to decide how much to let it matter. Southwest of here, he said after a moment, a day's ride. The study is on the ground floor, east-facing. Draw me a map, she said. He reached for a pen. He walked her out when the fire burned low, the afternoon having arrived quietly while they weren't attending to it. The light had gone thin and cold, the kind of February light that apologized for itself, and the lane outside was empty and silver still. At the gate she stopped to button her coat. He stood slightly behind her, not crowding, not imposing, simply present in the way she was beginning to associate with him, a form of nearness that didn't demand anything. The mornings, she said without looking at him, the ones you lose, do you... She stopped, reconsidered. Is it always the same? When you wake? A beat. Mostly, he said. There is a moment, before I remember that I won't remember, when it is simply morning. His voice was even, careful. Then I check the record, and the day begins. She thought about that, about what it cost to write oneself a record each night, to wake and read back your own life like a stranger. The face, she said very quietly. The one that stays. Yes. Does it help? Having something that remains? He was quiet for a moment long enough that she thought he might not answer, and then, without quite turning to look at her, yes, he said. In a way I cannot entirely explain, and that I am not entirely comfortable with. A pause. It is the only thing that has made the mornings feel like they belong to me. The wind moved through the lane. Somewhere distant, a church bell rang the hour. She faced forward again. Her driver was waiting at the crossroads, a patient silhouette. From now on, Tuesdays, same time, she said. Tuesdays, he agreed. She walked to the carriage. She did not look back. But she was aware, all the way to the crossroads and into the carriage and down the first cold mile of road, of standing at a threshold, the kind that doesn't announce itself until you've already crossed it. The kind from which, if you looked back, you could see quite clearly that something had changed. Tuesdays became something she did not have a name for, which was the first sign that they were becoming a problem. The second sign was that she arrived, for the third week in a row, 6 minutes early, and told herself it was because of the roads. The third sign, the one she was least able to dismiss, was that she had started noting things. Small involuntary observations that accumulated without permission, that he took his tea without sugar, that when he was thinking he went very still in a way that was different from his ordinary stillness, a kind of interior absence, a temporary vacancy, like a room whose occupant had stepped briefly away. That he had, on one occasion, begun a sentence and then stopped in the middle of it, and sat for a moment with a look on his face that she could only describe as a man reminding himself of something he already knew. He was writing in the record. She had not mentioned it. She had not mentioned any of it. What she had done instead was work. They had built over the past 3 weeks what she privately thought of as an architecture, a careful, documented structure of evidence that interlocked in ways that were, piece by piece, becoming genuinely compelling. Her father's letters, cross-referenced with Christian's financial records, painted a portrait of Lord Hartwell that was not flattering and would be very difficult to argue against. The map of Hartwell's estate remained folded in the drawer at the gatehouse table. They had not yet discussed when it would be used. But this Tuesday, when she arrived 6 minutes early to find him already at the table with a new set of documents and a look on his face that she had learned to read as something has changed, she knew the map was about to become relevant. "He's moved the timeline," Christian said, before she had fully entered the room. She closed the door. "Tell me." "The parliamentary session ends Friday, not Thursday. He'll return to the estate early." He pushed a letter across the table. She recognized the seal, the deliberate formality of it. "This arrived this morning. Hartwell is requesting a meeting. Here." She read the letter. It was brief, courteous, and entirely cold in the manner of a man who had mastered the language of civility as a weapon. "Lord Ashborne, I believe we have certain mutual interests to discuss at your earliest convenience. I propose your gatehouse, given its convenient privacy, on Wednesday evening." "He knows about this place," she said. "Yes." She set the letter down. The fire was burning well. The room was warm by gatehouse standards. Outside, the February light was making its usual thin apology. "If he comes here Wednesday," she said slowly, "and finds nothing, finds only you available for a conversation, he'll believe I'm isolated," Christian said, "manageable, that whatever I had, I no longer have the means to act on it." A pause. "He won't know about you. He won't know about the letters. You're going to meet with him. I'm going to meet with him. And while you're meeting with him," she said, and heard in her own voice the quality of arriving at a conclusion she wasn't sure she welcomed, "Hartwell's estate will be empty." He looked at her. "Vivian," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name, not Miss Ashford, not the formal distance they had maintained, just her name, direct and quiet, and it landed differently than she expected. "If this goes wrong, I know what it costs if it goes wrong," she said. "I also know what it costs if it doesn't happen." She met his eyes steadily. "I know what happens to my father if Hartwell is left free to finish what he started. I know what happens to you." She paused. "Do you?" The question was sharper than she intended. She saw it register. He sat back slightly, the familiar movement of a man recalibrating. "What I know," he said, after a moment, very carefully, with the precision of someone who had learned to be exact about what they knew and didn't, "is that I would like you to come back from this." The room was quiet in a way it hadn't been a moment before. She held his gaze for 3 steady seconds. "Then I'll come back," she said. "Help me prepare." They worked through the afternoon. She memorized the map of Hartwell's estate, not just the study but the surrounding rooms, the corridor, the position of the servants' entrance. He had drawn it with the same small, precise hand as the record on the wall, and looking at it she was aware not for the first time of the mind behind it. The kind of intelligence that was careful rather than showy, methodical rather than brilliant, the kind that built things meant to last. They reviewed what she needed to find. He knew the document, had seen a reference to it in the forged correspondence Hartwell had used against him. The original, a ledger entry in Hartwell's private accounting, predating the fraud by 3 years, showing the original relationship between Hartwell and the financial accounts used to orchestrate both ruinations. The before, the proof that it was planned, not opportunistic. As the light failed outside, she began to gather her coat. "There's one more thing," he said. She looked up. He was standing by the record wall. She had come to think of it that way, the record wall, with an expression she had not seen from him before, not guarded, not controlled. Something that had moved past those into whatever territory lay beyond them. "I want to show you something," he said, "before Wednesday, in case the timing doesn't permit it afterward." She crossed the room. The record on the wall she had seen before, the dates, the brief notations, the small clear handwriting. But he reached past her, toward the rightmost column, and she followed his hand and saw. The notes there were different. not the clinical record of what was lost. These were shorter, sometimes just a word, sometimes a phrase. Vivienne. November. V. The crossroads, the carriage, a date in December. And then quietly, incrementally, more. Small observations, small specifics. The way she read the letters, didn't flinch. And later she came back. And later still in handwriting that was identical but somehow different in its weight. I remembered this one. All of it. She stood very still. After every Tuesday, he said quietly behind her, I kept the record as I always do, but these... A pause. These, I do not need the record to keep. These, I remember without it. I don't know what that means. I have not allowed myself to decide what it means. His voice was completely level, the way it always was when it cost him something. But I thought you should know. She looked at the wall for a long moment. She was aware of him very close behind her, not crowding, never that, but present, in the way that had become as familiar as the gatehouse fire by now, as specific to him as the careful handwriting and the blue eyes and the patience that was nothing like indifference. She turned. The distance between them was smaller than she had calibrated, not by much, just enough that when she looked up at him she was looking at him fully, all the careful control and the shadows under his eyes, and the first honest helplessness she had seen on his face, and she thought, there he is, under all of it. There was the actual man. Christian, she said. He looked at her. She reached up, slowly, deliberately, with full knowledge of what she was doing, and pressed her gloved hand briefly to his jaw. Just that. Just the one moment, glove against skin, her palm against the scar at his temple for the space of one breath. He did not move. He went very still in that interior way of his, the room whose occupant has stepped away stillness, except that he was entirely there, more wholly present than she had ever seen him. She lowered her hand. Come back from Wednesday too, she said quietly. That's all I ask. Something shifted in his face, slow, tidal, the way light changed in a room when a cloud moved off the sun. Yes, he said. She stepped back, picked up her coat, moved to the door with the measured calm of someone who needed the walk to the crossroads, and the long, cold road home to reassemble herself before she arrived there. She did not look back. But she knew as she stepped into the winter evening that the entry in the record tonight would not be loss. Hartwell's estate was everything Lord Christian Vale's gatehouse was not. It was large in the way that announced itself, the kind of large that was not about space but about statement, every proportional excess calibrated to communicate exactly how far above reproach its owner believed himself to stand. The carriageway was long and torchlit even at this hour, Thursday being the night of Hartwell's standing dinner with his county associates, which meant the front of the house was alive and attended and entirely irrelevant to Vivienne, who came in through the kitchen garden. She had arrived the previous night, a coaching inn 2 miles east, a room paid in cash under a name she would not use again. She had spent the intervening hours reviewing the map, reviewing what she needed, reviewing, with the mental discipline she had developed over a childhood spent watching her father think, every variable she could identify and every contingency she could prepare for. She had not spent those hours thinking about a hand pressed to a man's jaw or the thing that had shifted in a face when she did it. She had been very focused on not doing that. The kitchen garden entrance had been described to her accurately. A low wooden gate unlocked in the evenings, the kitchen staff's habit, the cook preferring to take air between courses. She slipped through before the half-hour bell, inside the corridor, moving toward the east side of the ground floor with the quiet, purposeful unhaste of someone who belonged there. The servants' corridor ran the full length of the ground floor. She counted doors, 3, then the turn, then 4 more, and found the study door exactly where the map said it would be. She pressed her ear briefly to the wood. Silence. Her pulse was steady. She had told herself it would be steady, and it was, but underneath the steadiness deeper, she could feel her heartbeat heavier than usual, a slow, insistent drumming at the base of her throat that no amount of controlled breathing entirely erased. This was what she had trained herself not to show. What she had never entirely trained herself not to feel. Locked. A key mechanism rather than a bolt. Better than a bolt. She drew the slim pick from her coat, knelt before the lock, and worked with the careful patience of a woman who had borrowed this skill 3 months ago and had practiced it every night since on the lock of her own study door. 1 minute, perhaps a little more. The mechanism gave. The study smelled of beeswax and old paper, and something underneath both. A cold, self-satisfied weight, as if the air in the room had absorbed the character of the man who occupied it. Vivian moved to the desk by the far window exactly as the map described. She did not rush. Rushing made noise, noise made consequences. Second drawer. Her fingers found the handle. She pulled. The drawer slid open with a dry whisper of wood on wood, and the sound seemed enormous in the silence of the room. She stopped, breath held, listening. Nothing from the corridor. Nothing from the floors above. She exhaled slowly and looked down. Inside, a private accounting ledger, leather-bound, the initials HMC embossed on the front cover in the manner of a man who believed in the ownership of things. She opened it, turned pages with the edge of her thumbnail. Careful, no crinkle of paper, no disturbance of the ink. She found the year, the month, and then she found it. She read it twice, a series of transactions, a name she recognized from Crestian's financial records, and a notation in Hartwell's own hand that, in its precise and self-incriminating clarity, was the kind of thing that happened when a man was absolutely certain no one would ever look. He had been wrong. She was looking. She made her copies with the methodical speed of someone who had practiced the task. Her hand was steady. She had gone past the range of emotion that manifests as trembling and into a register that was very clear and very cold and entirely focused. The scratching of her own pen against paper sounded in that silence like something enormous. She did not stop. She was folding the last page when she heard it. Footsteps, not from the corridor, from the room adjacent. A connecting door she had not seen on the map. Heavy, deliberate, the tread of a large man moving without any care about noise. The tread of someone who believed himself alone in his own house. The cold moved through her chest like a blade. 4 seconds. Perhaps 5. She did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Across the room in 3 long strides, the window latch turning under her fingers, the night air flooding in cold and sharp as she pushed the casement wide. The ivy outside was thick and old, its woody stems rough against her palms as she swung one leg over the sill. The connecting door opened. She dropped. The ground came up fast. She landed hard, knees bending to absorb it, one hand bracing against the cold earth of the kitchen garden. For a moment she stayed completely still, listening. Above her, the study window glowed amber. A shadow moved across it, stopped, moved again. She did not breathe. Then the shadow passed on, and the room was still, and the night was just the night again, frost and silence and the distant sound of laughter from the dinner inside. She rose slowly, tucked the copies into the inner pocket of her coat, pressed her hand flat against her sternum for one moment, feeling the thump of her own heart faster now, insistent, almost indignant, as if it had waited until the danger passed to register its objection. She allowed herself that one moment. Then she moved to the gate and through it and out into the lane. She walked the 2 miles to the coaching inn without hurrying. The night was very dark and very cold, and the copies were against her chest, and she was aware, all the way down the frozen road, under every bare tree and past every dark field, of something she could not call relief exactly, because relief would come later. What she felt now was more primitive than that. She had it. She thought, I need to tell him. She sent no word ahead. She arrived at the gatehouse at 7 in the morning, the earliest she had ever come before the fire was lit, the frost still on the gate and the lane and the skeletal ivy. She knocked twice. She heard footsteps, then a pause at the door that she knew was him assessing, checking, and then the door opened. He had not slept. It was visible in a way he couldn't entirely manage, not in disarray, nothing as obvious as that, but in a loosening of the careful containment he maintained, the slightly undone quality of a man who had been awake since far too early and had not yet performed the morning's reassembly. His coat was on but imperfectly buttoned. His eyes, when they found her face, did the small, swift thing again, the one she had learned. And this time, she let herself name it. Relief. You're here, he said. I'm here, she said. I have it. He stepped back to let her in. She told him everything in sequence, the way she always reported things, not dramatized, not stripped bare, just accurate and in order. He listened without interrupting. He made the fire while she talked, the familiar sounds of it, and by the time she finished, the room was warming and the documents were on the table between them. He read them with the same care he brought to everything, twice fully without commentary, until he was done. And when he set them down, he looked at them for a moment with an expression she knew how to read now, and what she read in it was, the end of something. "This is it," he said. "Yes. This and the letters and the financial records. It's a complete case," she said. "With a solicitor who knows what they're doing. Hartwell is finished." He was quiet for a moment. And then, very quietly, without announcement, he sat down. Not the deliberate, controlled movement she was accustomed to from him. He simply sat in the chair by the fire with the look of a man who has been standing for a very long time and has just been told he can stop. She sat across from him. Across. The fire was going well now, the gatehouse doing its best against the morning cold, and the light was coming through the window at the angle she associated with early Tuesday hours, that thin winter light that had come to mean something she hadn't planned on it meaning. "The record," she said after a moment. "Last night, after Hartwell." He looked up. "Did you remember it this morning?" He was still for a beat. Then, "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." She nodded, slowly. "The mornings," she said. "Since November. How many complete mornings have you had since we started?" He looked at her for a long moment. "All of them," he said. "Since the Masquerade. Every morning since the first Tuesday. Complete." The fire crackled. Outside, a bird was doing something persistent and cheerful in the frozen ivy. "Christian," she said. "I know," he said, quietly. "I know what it—" He stopped. The look on his face was the most open she had ever seen it, the careful structure of his usual expression having been, by exhaustion or by relief, or by this morning's quality of light, entirely set aside. "I don't want to ask anything of you," he said. "Whatever this is and whatever the reason, the mornings—" He stopped again, the sentence not finding its end. "What if I asked something of you?" she said. He went still in that interior way, the one that meant he was entirely present. She leaned forward slightly, not far, not dramatically, just enough. The small, deliberate shift of closing a distance. "Don't lose the mornings again," she said. "Whatever we have to do to prevent that. Whatever comes next with Hartwell, with the magistrate, with all of it. Don't lose the mornings." His hands on the arms of the chair were very still. "Vivian," he said. "Just her name. Just that." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm not asking you to make it make sense. I'm simply asking you," her voice was steady, "don't lose them." He looked at her for a long time, and then, slowly, with the care of a man doing something for the first time, something he had understood theoretically and never permitted himself practically, he reached across the small distance between them and took her hand. Not with any agenda, not with pressure or declaration. Just her hand in his, the way you held something you had been afraid to hold because you understood its value and had not thought yourself allowed. She did not pull away. Outside, the February morning was happening without them, all its frost and thin light and persistent birds, and in a small stone gatehouse somewhere in Hawthorne County, the fire kept the cold at the door, and two people sat in the quiet of something beginning rather than something ending. She thought about the record on the wall, the entries in the right-hand column that didn't need to be written down. I remembered this one. All of it. She thought she understood now what that meant. The magistrate was a man called Sir Edmund Foss, known in Hawthorne County for three things: his precision, his incorruptibility, and his profound displeasure at having his time wasted. He was not having his time wasted. He had been reading for 40 minutes in complete silence. Christian sat to Vivian's left at the long table in the magistrate's receiving room, both of them still and quiet, as the careful sounds of paper turning accompanied whatever was happening in Sir Edmund's face, which was, progressively, the face of a man encountering something he had not expected and was recalibrating accordingly. They had submitted everything. Her father's letters, the originals now retrieved by Christian from the location he had not previously disclosed. A solicitor's archive in London, sealed under a false estate name, the kind of protection a man takes when he knows he has something that could destroy him. Christian's financial records carefully annotated, the copies from Hartwell's ledger, along with a sworn statement from the locksmith's associate regarding the document's provenance. 3 corroborating letters from creditors who had been told that Ashford's insolvency was due to mismanagement, and who had the paperwork to contradict that account. And 1 final document that Vivian had not expected, a statement from Hartwell's own solicitor, delivered quietly, carefully, with the expression of a man who had spent several years not sleeping well, to Christian's door 2 days before the magistrate's appointment. Even men who work for devils occasionally found their conscience. Sir Edmund set down the final page. He looked at both of them for a moment. "Lord Ashbourne," he said. "Miss Ashford." "Sir Edmund," said Christian. "This is," Sir Edmund said, with the measured weight of a man choosing every word, "a comprehensive and exceptionally well-documented account of a sustained fraud engineered by Lord Hartwell against 2 separate households, spanning a period of no less than 4 years." A pause. "It is also one of the most meticulously assembled cases I have reviewed in 30 years on the bench. We had time to be thorough," Vivian said. Sir Edmund looked at her with something that might, on a less rigidly composed face, have been appreciation. "I will require Lord Hartwell's attendance at a formal inquiry," he said, "within the week. The documentation here leaves very little room for alternative interpretation." He set his hand flat on the papers. "I will also require written statements from both of you, formally attesting to the chain of custody of each document." "We anticipated that," Christian said. He reached into the leather case at his side and produced 2 prepared statements, already signed and witnessed. "I took the liberty." Sir Edmund looked at them, then at Christian, then at Vivian. Something moved across his face, a brief, almost imperceptible softening. "You took a considerable risk," he said, "not a reprimand. Simply an observation, delivered with the gravity of a man who understood what risks looked like and what they cost. Both of you. The alternative," Vivian said, "was no risk at all and a very certain outcome." Sir Edmund nodded once, with the economy of a man who did not need to repeat himself. "Lord Ashbourne," he looked at Christian directly, "the claims made against your family's holdings over the past 2 years, I will review them within the framework of this inquiry. If the fraud is confirmed as I expect it to be, you may anticipate a formal reversal." A pause. "It will not undo the time, but it will undo the rest." Christian was very still. "Thank you," he said, quietly. The same register he used for everything that actually mattered. "Miss Ashford," Sir Edmund turned to her, "your father's case will require its own formal petition, separate from this inquiry, to restore the Ashford estate's standing. I recommend retaining counsel immediately. Given what is documented here, the outcome should not be in question. The process, however, will take time." "I understand," she said. "We expected that." "We." She heard the word come out of her mouth and did not qualify it. Sir Edmund noticed. She was quite certain of it, from the way he looked briefly from her to Christian and back. The experienced, unhurried assessment of a man who had been reading rooms and people for 30 years. Whatever he concluded, he kept behind the professional stillness of his face. "I will be in contact within 3 days," he said. "Good morning." Outside, the February air had softened slightly. Not warm, not even close, but something had gone out of the sharpest edge of the cold, as if the season were beginning reluctantly to consider its options. The magistrate's building stood on a quiet street in the market town of Somerford, and the street was occupied at this hour only by a baker making a delivery and 2 small dogs with strong opinions about each other. They stood on the steps. Neither of them spoke immediately. Vivienne looked at the street. She was aware of what was happening in her chest, something that was not quite relief and not quite joy, something that had no adequate word in English, the feeling of having been carrying a very specific weight for a very specific time, and finding suddenly that the ground beneath it had changed. "He'll confirm it," she said, not a question. "Yes," Christian said, "Hartwell will retain counsel. Try to delay." "Yes." "It will take months." "Yes," he said again. "It will." A pause. "But the outcome, as the man said, is not in question." She turned slightly to look at him. He was facing forward, watching the street with the quality of attention he brought to things when he was genuinely still inside, not guarded, not controlled, just present, in the uncomplicated way of someone who had reached for now, a place where presence was enough. "Your father," he said quietly. "When will you tell him?" She had thought about this. She had thought about it at some length in the coaching inn and in the carriage and in the long, careful silences of Tuesday mornings. "Today," she said, "I'll go directly from here." "Do you want—" He stopped. She looked at him. "Company," she said, something in his face. "I was going to say, do you want me to send word ahead? Have a letter delivered? Give him time before you arrive?" A pause. "But company is also—" The shadow of a smile, slightly less shadow than it used to be. "Company is also what I was going to say." She felt something she usually kept carefully in its place shift slightly. "Not today," she said. "Today is for him and me." She held his eyes steadily. "But I would like, afterward, when there is something to celebrate rather than simply to report." She paused. "I would like to introduce you, properly." He looked at her for a moment with that expression, the one that had no adequate name, the one that was recognition and something beyond it. "I would like that," he said. She nodded once, the small definitive nod that meant she had made a decision and was at peace with it. Then she looked back at the street. The baker was finishing his delivery. The two small dogs had apparently resolved their dispute and were now proceeding in the same direction with the dignified manner of individuals who had never had any disagreement whatsoever. "Christian," she said. "Yes." "The mornings." She kept her eyes on the street. "Last night." "This morning." A beat. "Complete," he said quietly. She nodded. "Good," she said. And that was all. And it was entirely sufficient. Spring arrived in Hawthorne County the way it always did. Not all at once, not with any announcement, but incrementally, in small specific ways. A new quality in the light. The ivy at the gatehouse wall going from skeletal to tentatively green. The garden behind Ashford House beginning, quietly, to remember itself. The formal inquiry had concluded 5 weeks prior. Lord Hartwell had, as anticipated, retained counsel and attempted delay. What he had not anticipated, what his counsel had apparently not adequately prepared him for, was the completeness of the documentation against him, or the resolve of Sir Edmund Foss, who had reviewed 30 years of cases and had developed a comprehensive intolerance for the variety of crime that weaponized respectability. The inquiry had lasted 4 days. The outcome had not, in the end, been in question. Hartwell's county seat was under legal review, his financial instruments frozen. His solicitor, the one who had appeared at the gatehouse door with the expression of a man not sleeping well, had been deposed and was, in exchange for certain considerations, cooperating fully with the court's subsequent investigation into a pattern of conduct that, it emerged, predated both the Ashford case and the Ashbourne case by several years. He had been doing this for a long time. The difference this time was that someone had looked carefully enough, and long enough, and with enough patience to make the looking stick. The Ashford estate petition was filed. The timeline was what it was. Months, the solicitor had said, and he was likely right. But the outcome, as a different solicitor had told Vivienne in a dusty office in Somerford, was not in question. She had sat in the chair across from him and felt that phrase enter her body like warmth entering a cold room, and had spent 3 measured minutes being entirely unable to say anything at all. She had told her father. She had gone directly from the magistrate's building that February afternoon, and she had sat across from him in his study, the room he had retreated into over the past year with increasing permanence, the room that smelled of old paper and the staleness of a man who had closed himself in with his worst thoughts. And she had laid the documents on the desk in front of him. She had watched him read. She had watched his face go through things she did not have names for. She had watched him look up at her with an expression she recognized, with the shock of recognition, as the face from before all of this, the face from when she was a girl, and her father was the kind of man who watched rooms and taught her to do the same, the face that shame had bent away and that she had not seen directly in 6 months. He had not said anything for a long time. Then he had said, "Vivienne." Just her name, just that. She had reached across the desk and taken his hand the way she had not done since she was very young, and she had held it, and they had sat in that room while the afternoon came through the window and changed the color of everything. The gatehouse in spring was different. The ivy was coming in green. The fire was no longer strictly necessary, though they kept it lit out of habit. Their habit, The Tuesday habit of a fire and documents and tea, and the slow incremental building of something that had begun as an alliance and had become, by degrees, she had not tracked closely enough, considerably more than that. It was not a Tuesday. She had come on a Thursday because she could, because the formal urgency was resolved, and what remained between them was no longer structured by necessity, and she had decided, with the direct, deliberate honesty that was her nature, to stop pretending that her reasons for coming were primarily practical. He had opened the door when he heard the carriage. He had looked at her with that look, the relief one, the one she had named months ago. And then, because it was Thursday and the crisis was over, and there was no document on the table requiring their immediate attention, he had simply held the door and said, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," she said. "I came anyway." He looked at her. "Come in," he said. Something in his voice that was the same as always and entirely different at once. The same careful quietness, but the layer beneath it, the layer he maintained with very significant effort, had been set aside. She recognized it, the setting aside. She had watched him do it gradually, Tuesday by Tuesday, like a man who had been living in a very small room and was slowly, cautiously, determining that the walls were not as structural as he had believed. They sat by the fire. The documents were not on the table. The table had, for the first time in months, nothing on it at all, which gave the room a different quality. More space in it, more just the room itself, the stone walls and the green beginning outside the window, and the fire that was more warmth than necessity. He told her something he had not yet told her. He told it simply, the way he told everything, without ornamentation, the way of a man who had learned that plain truth was the thing most likely to be trusted. He told her that the morning after the magistrate's inquiry concluded, he had woken at his usual hour and lain still in the familiar way, the way of a man waiting to discover what he had and hadn't kept, and that for a long moment he had not moved at all, simply looked at the ceiling, conducting the internal inventory that had been his first act every morning for 2 years, and then he had realized there was nothing missing, not just the previous day, all of it, every Tuesday. Every document and argument and the quality of cold February light through the gatehouse window. Every version of her face he had seen. The composed one she deployed as armor. The real one. The one that appeared when something landed that she had not prepared for. The one from the moment in the record room, her hand at his jaw, that he had written down and then found the next morning that he hadn't needed to. All of it. Complete. "I didn't write in the record," he said. "For the first time in 2 years, I got up and did not write in the record." A pause. "I didn't know what to do with that. I stood in the room for several minutes." The shadow of a smile. Less shadow than it had ever been. "Eventually I made tea." She looked at him. "And the morning after that?" she asked. "Complete." "And after that?" "Yes," he said quietly. Everyone. She had known. She had suspected, from things he had said in the weeks following, small references, the careful way he sometimes mentioned mornings, the absence of weight in his voice when the subject arose, as though something that had been pressing down on every sentence for 2 years had been gradually, permanently lifted. But hearing it directly was different. She held it for a moment. "The curse," she said. "Do you believe it's gone?" He was quiet for a moment, with the honest, searching quality of a man who took the question seriously. "I believe," he said finally, "that whatever it was, whether it was Hartwell's doing or something older than that, some pattern in my family of losing what matters through neglect or through fear." He stopped. "I believe it required something specific to stop." He looked at her directly. "It required someone who looked at the record and didn't leave." She held his gaze. "I wasn't going to leave," she said. "I know," he said. "That was the thing, you weren't. And I didn't know what to do with that either." A pause, smaller than the last. "I'm learning." The fire shifted. Outside the window, the new green ivy caught the afternoon light and held it. She leaned forward slightly in her chair, the small, deliberate shift that said, "I am here, and I am choosing to be here, and that is what I am telling you." "Christian," she said, "I came here on a Thursday without documents, without an agenda." She let that sit for a moment. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He looked at her for a long, still moment. The look on his face was something she had not seen from him before, something that existed on the other side of all of it, something she could only describe as a man who had stopped waiting for the floor to give way and had finally, carefully, put his full weight down. He stood. She stood. The distance between them closed. He raised one hand and brushed the back of his fingers against her cheek. Not a gesture of possession, not even quite a gesture of courtship in the formal sense. It was the gesture of a man touching something real, to confirm that it was real, that the mornings would confirm it and the evenings would confirm it. And the record on the wall would say, from now on, only things that were good. She tilted her head very slightly into his hand. He leaned down. The kiss was not urgent. It was not hesitant. It was the kiss of two people who had been very patient for very good reasons, and who understood what they were doing. The quiet, certain kind, the kind that didn't need to rush, because it intended to last. His hand moved to the back of her head, careful, unhurried. Her hand rose to his lapel, holding on lightly. Outside, the April afternoon continued to happen. The ivy was green at the window. A bird was making the unreasonably cheerful noise it had been making since February, when no one had asked it to. When they separated, it was slowly, and they stayed close. And he rested his forehead briefly against hers in the quiet of two people who do not need to say the thing because the room is already full of it. Thursday, he said quietly. A question and not a question. Thursday, she confirmed, and Tuesday, and any other day that suits. The not quite smile, which was at this proximity and without the gold mask and without the weight of 2 years of mornings going missing, quite definitively, unmistakably, entirely a smile. Then I will need to make a better fire, he said. She laughed, the real one, not the practiced social version, and he watched it happen with the expression of someone cataloguing something he intended to keep. Private Journal of Lord Christian Vale, Count of Ashborne, September 1816. The study at Ashbourne Manor faces east, and at this hour of the morning the light comes through the tall windows, in long amber columns that fall across the desk and the bookshelves and the Persian rug and everything else that has, over these past years, come to feel so unmistakably like home that the word no longer strikes me as the complicated thing it once was. I am writing this at the desk my father used, and his father before him. It is old oak, solid, warm to the touch in the mornings when the sun reaches it. I have written at it every day for 4 years, not out of necessity, not out of fear, but out of something I only recently found the courage to name. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is new for me too. I should note that I have not lost a morning in 4 years, 2 months and 11 days. Not that I count, not the way I used to. The old record still hangs on the wall in the gatehouse. I have not taken it down. It felt wrong to take it down. It is the account of a man learning to survive something unsurvivable, and it deserves to stand as testament. Vivian agrees. She said, when I asked her once whether it bothered her to see it, "It's where you kept yourself alive. I would never ask you to pretend that didn't happen." She says things like that, without ceremony, without expecting applause. She simply says them and moves on, as if profound grace were a perfectly ordinary thing to dispense on a Tuesday morning. From the window of this study, I can see the south garden. She is there now. She does not know I am watching. She is too entirely occupied. She is crouched in the long grass near the old rose beds, the ones she spent the better part of last spring coaxing back from a decade of neglect, which she undertook with the same focused, patient determination she brings to everything. And she is crouched there because our daughter, who is not yet 2 years old and has recently discovered the revolutionary possibility of independent locomotion, has made a spirited and determined bid for the far end of the garden. Eliza. She has her mother's stubbornness and, God help us all, her mother's instinct for finding exactly the path that requires the most negotiation. She also has, I am told by everyone who sees her, my eyes. I did not know until recently what it felt like to look at something with your own eyes and understand for the first time that your eyes were worth giving. Now I watch my daughter toddle through the long September grass with her arms out for balance, and I understand it very well. Vivienne has caught up with her now. She reaches down, her hand finding Eliza's small one with the ease of something done 1,000 times, and they stand together at the edge of the rose bed, Vivienne pointing at something, Eliza considering it with the grave, total attention she brings to new information. A bee, perhaps, a late bloom, something small and bright that a not quite 2-year-old finds worth stopping for. The morning light is full on them both. I have put down my pen. I am simply looking. I used to keep this record because I was afraid, Because every night I wrote down what the day had held, terrified that by dawn I would wake a stranger to my own life, that the man who had lived those hours would be gone, replaced by someone with no claim to what had been built. Every entry was an act of grief written in advance. I kept records of what I feared to lose, conversations, decisions, the specific quality of light on a winter afternoon. I wrote down names and dates and details, like a man cataloguing the contents of a house he expected to burn. I wrote down her face. Before I even knew her name, I wrote down her face, the one that waited for me every morning, the only constant in the ruin of my continuity. I wrote it the way you might write down the address of the one place in the world you know you could always return to. I did not know then that she was real, that she was already moving through the world, already reading her father's letters, already planning, already becoming the woman who would walk into the Hartwell Masquerade in a borrowed mask and look at me across a room as if she were entirely unafraid. I did not know that the face that kept me was hers. She is laughing now. Something Eliza has done, some small new triumphant thing, and Vivian's laugh carries across the garden and through the glass and into this room where I am supposed to be answering correspondence. I am not answering correspondence. I am writing this instead, because I have learned in 4 years of good mornings that some things deserve a record simply because they are beautiful, not because they might be lost, not because grief requires documentation, but because beauty, genuine and unguarded beauty, is worth the act of witnessing, worth slowing down for, worth pressing into ink on paper so that on some future morning, when I am old and the garden is still and the house is quiet, I might open this journal and remember September, the South Garden, the roses still in bloom, my wife's laugh, my daughter's first steps through the long grass, the morning light, amber and full, on everything I love. I am not afraid. That is the thing I want to remember most, I think. Not the evidence or the magistrate, or the night I stood in a cold gatehouse and decided to trust a woman with a borrowed mask and a spine like iron. I want to remember this. The morning I sat at my father's desk in my father's house, in the life I had begun to believe I did not deserve, and felt, for the first time in longer than I can account for, entirely and irrevocably unafraid. Outside, Vivian has scooped Eliza up, and Eliza is objecting in the cheerful, non-committal way of a child who doesn't actually mind very much. Vivian is saying something to her. I cannot hear the words, only the tone, which is warm and amused and entirely her. She looks up at the window. She sees me. She raises one eyebrow. That particular eyebrow, the one that has, over the course of 4 years, communicated approximately 40 distinct varieties of meaning, and currently communicates. You are watching instead of working, and I am entirely aware of this, and we will discuss it later. I smile. She shakes her head. The corner of her mouth gives way. Eliza waves, because Eliza waves at everything now. She has recently discovered that the world tends to wave back, which has confirmed for her a fundamental generosity in things that I hope she carries for the rest of her life. I wave back. Then I close this journal, and I cap my pen, and I push back my chair from my father's old oak desk, and I go out into the garden. From the private journal of Lord Crestian Vale, Count of Ashborne. Final entry, September 1816. Morning. Complete. As all of them are now. As all of them will be.
They told me love was fragile, like glass in trembling hands, that it shatters in the silence before you understand. You used to wake up empty, with shadows where you've been, but something in your quiet pulled the daylight back in. I don't need a promise written in the sky. I don't need forever if it's just a lie. Just stay when the night fades into blue. Stay like the light that finds the truth. I don't need the world to change, I just need the morning to remain. If you're here when the dark gives way, that's enough for me. If you're here when I wait, stays. I was building walls of paper, writing down each day, afraid the dawn would steal it and carry you away. But you stood there in the doorway, like you'd always been. Not a dream I'd lose by sunrise, but something I could live in. You don't speak in thunder, you don't need to prove. Every time I look at you, the fear just moves. So stay when the night fades into blue. Stay like the light that breaks in two. I don't need the world to change, I just need the morning to remain. If you're here when the dark gives way, that's enough for me. If you're here when I wake, the morning stays. I used to count the hours, I used to mark the pain. Now I count the ways you say my name. And every single sunrise feels like something new. Not because the sky is different, but because it's you. So stay when the night fades into blue. Stay like you always do. And I don't need forever's claim, I just need your hand in mine the same. If you're here when the dark gives way, that's enough for me. If you're here when I wake, the morning stays. No more writing down the days, no more fear of what it takes. If you're here when I wake,